It is a crowded set here. Julia Banks, thanks so much for joining us on To The Point.
Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure
to be here. Thanks for having me.
We'll let you introduce the other 7% for us now that are obviously sitting alongside you.
Look, I'm pleased to be part of the 8%. But,
be part of it, maybe you constitute the whole of it.
If you weren't part of the 8%, there'd be no one that we'd be talking to right now. You are 8% of women in the lower house.
I'm pleased to be the 8%.
We should get her a T-shirt. What do you reckon? I am the 8%.
You know, that is actually 1% higher
idea.
than Brendan Nelson's ratings fell to when he was leader.
Oh, you know what I mean? I've got a lot of time for Brendan Nelson.
I still remember when he was...
As you know, Peter, though, we have wonderful, wonderful, solid women in the Liberal Party. We've got, and our first cabinet minister.
Yes, we know. We see them all behind the Prime Minister.
Kelly O'Dwyer.
Yeah,
Kelly O'Dwyer.
We see them all.
Minister ever to have a baby.
We see about half of them, just by pure coincidence, positioned directly behind the Prime Minister in question time every day, and again today later.
We'll look for that.
It's just such a coincidence, isn't it?
It's amazing.
Because I think it's like a lottery, the way that those seats get distributed.
Or do you think maybe they just rush in and grab them?
Oh, so you think the women are sort of a bit more bolshy when it comes to grabbing seat positions?
I would back them on that. I would indeed. All right, Julia, let's ask you some actual policy-related questions.
Well, can we start with the bank levy?
Well, ask Julia. She's the guest.
Well, I'm not going to ask her if I can start with the bank levy. I'm just going to start with the bank levy. I'm interested in your views on this. The bank levy, the Treasurer tells us that it shouldn't be passed on, but he also tells us that introducing it will increase competition with smaller banks. How does it increase competition if it doesn't get passed on?
Well, first may I say with the bank levy, it's what you call in business a fast adapt in the sense that it's typical in other advanced economies. Like it's a fast adapt from the UK. The British system does exactly the same thing and doesn't pass it on to their bank customers. So when we think about the banks, we're talking about the 5 major banks, and they, you know, make a consolidated profit together of about 30 billion. And this is, you know, less than 4%, as I understand it, that they are obliged to pay under the bank levy. So I think it's a fair and reasonable system. How does it create competition? Well, there's a number of things that we're doing in relation to that as well through the House Economics Committee.
I mean the levy itself, though. How does the levy, if it's not passed on, also increase competition? Because that's what we're told that it'll do.
Well, basically, the banks, we have highly resourced the ACCC to make sure that they don't, you know, to act it. We've got one of the best corporate watchdogs in the world in the ACCC, and the Turnbull government have resourced them to ensure that the banks report on this regularly. And if the banks, you know, behave the way react to this and continue to react to this in terms of saying, oh, well, we've got to pass it on, we've got to pass it on, and they do in fact pass it on, then consumers can certainly respond with their feet. This creates competition for the smaller, the more regional banks. This is only affecting the four major banks. And
Julia,
as the Treasurer rightfully says, as the Treasurer rightfully says, this is a small levy. It's not an unusual exercise. It's applied in other Western democracies. It's applied in the United Kingdom. And
very different in the UK, though. Very different in the UK. I mean, their banks were bailed out to the tune of billions of dollars of taxpayers' money. That hasn't occurred here.
Indeed not. However, we've seen a lot of issues with the banks, and all the Labor Party can bleat on about is let's call for a Royal Commission. Well, you and I both know that a Royal Commission could take anywhere between 5 and 10 years. It'll be lawyers at 10 paces. It'll be, you know, but it won't have that direct effect and impact and immediate outcome and solutions for bank customers. Like our Complaints Resolution Authority has immediate outcome for bank customers.
And I've heard that argument. We had Sarah Henderson making it, and I think there's some merit to that argument. But let's come back to the bank levy. You've made the point that if the banks do pass it on, that does create the environment for competition, because, you know, consumers can say, well, I don't like this, I'm going to walk my home loan over to another bank that isn't passing this levy on. But that's really Peter's point. If the banks don't pass it on, it doesn't create competition, does it? It just raises revenue for the government.
Well, if the banks, everyone knows that this decision is the bank's decision. It is their decision. It's their business, and it's their decision to take. So they have their business model, and what I'm saying is that they can fit that within their business model. But in terms of our overall philosophy in the Turnbull government is to make life better and easier and to act in the best interest of the bank customer. That's what we've done in the bank inquiry. That's why the Treasurer's approved 9 of the recommendations out of the second report, out of the Coleman Committee, and we've introduced a number of measures. One of the ones that I'm really passionate about is senior executive accountability. Now, we've seen case after case with the CommInsure cases, Australians all over the country impacted by misconduct by the banks, and yet a Royal Commission may not get a result and won't get a result for those individuals for 10 plus years, because those people will have to sue and take the banks on. It's not palatable to many people to take a big bank on in litigation.
Absolutely. Look, your point is well made.
So there's that measure, the ACCC, and
So let me ask this then, because this is the issue that the Parliament grappled with yesterday in question time. How much money is this levy going to raise? We're seeing conflicting reports. How much money is this levy going to raise for the government?
Well, the Treasurer had answered that question in question time yesterday, and basically it's the ATO who determines how much tax needs to be paid, and the banks will make that decision in terms of a taxation refund in relation to that. So that again is the bank's business decision about that. But as the Treasurer has confirmed, we are confident that these numbers will obviously align to the budget, the whole budget story in relation to the bank levy. The muddying of the waters and the whole objection to this bank levy. What astounds me, sitting in the House yesterday after question time and listening to the Labor Party, they don't know whether to be the bank's friend or foe. Like they've all been, whining and dining and schmoozing with them, and we've got Anna Bligh out there saying,
is that the only choice, though?
You're either their customers.
Is that the only choice? You're either their friend or you're their enemy? Is that the way the government sees it?
No, I think our banks are, clearly we have one of the best, most secure banking industries in the world, and that's why we withstood the GFC. I mean, I was working for a multinational organisation at the time, that was headquartered in the US and London, and they were all saying Australia is like standalone, and that's largely a credit to our banks and our, the sophistication of our regulations. So I think, we've got to stand respectfully with the banks. This sort of friend or foe positioning is not right, but certainly the bank levy is something that is right at this time in Australia's history and at this time in Australia's economic plan, that this bank levy, which is imposed overseas as well, should definitely be imposed.
So you said that Labor doesn't know whether it's the bank's friend or foe. Presumably the government's clear. Are you friends or foe of the banks?
We are the government of the country, and we want to see the economy, we want to see the budget get back to surplus. So all those measures that we've put in place are, absolutely neutral. Like I'm on the House Economics Committee. That doesn't mean I'm the enemy of the banks or anything like that, but it also doesn't mean that, I'll schmooze or align with them.
But hang on a second. I've got to ask this, because you said that Labor doesn't know whether it's friend or foe of the banks, so presumably the government knows. Is it friend or foe?
We're aligned. We have a professional relationship with the banks. It would, as with everything with our government, with the Turnbull government, we are in the sensible centre in terms of our policies and in terms of what we are doing for the interests of all Australians. So that's our position with the banks. The Labor government have tried to talk about our banking friends, and now all of a sudden they're sprouting the lines of the banks, which is what I heard in in the Parliament yesterday. That
Well,
they're basically saying they're basically repeating the quotations and the lines and statements that have been made by the bankers in their objection to the bank levy. Yet on the other hand, they're happy to say, oh yeah, we'll take the bank levy, but this is why we don't like it. And why we don't like it is for pure political reasons, not for anything to do with good economic management.
Well, look, you know, Chris Bowen and Labor can speak for themselves, but just reflecting on the questions that were asked in Parliament yesterday, they weren't criticising the bank levy, they were questioning how much it would raise. And that's a legitimate question when the people who are actually going to pay the levy say that they're not going to have to pay as much as the government says it's going to get in revenue. Now, whether we're talking about accrual accounting or cash accounting, the reality is the number the banks say that they're going to pay is lower than what the government says it's going to get. And that's a legitimate question, isn't it? To ask, what is this actually going to bring in? If it's a revenue measure, what is the revenue that the government is going to receive?
To be clear, the statements that I was talking about weren't actually the ones made in question time. It was during the MPI sessions where I heard a number of members, Labor members, talking about, you know, making quotations that sounded remarkably similar to what the banks had been saying publicly. And in relation to what money the government's actually going to get, the Treasurer was very clear in his answer at question time.
All right, Julia Banks, unfortunately we're running out of time today. You're going to get to question time, see if you get asked, if any of those questions get asked.
She's not going to get asked any because...
No, if any of those questions get asked.
Okay. Well, do you have some inside knowledge that you don't know about? No? Okay.
I would never claim that.
Julia Banks, thanks very much for your
Thank
company.
you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Pleasure to be here.
All
Thanks a
right.
lot. Cheers.
Thank you.